Malcolm is a Papuan-born conservation leader raised among the Yali people of the Papuan Highlands and later a decorated Canadian law enforcement officer. After 25 years abroad, he returned home to co-found YAPPENDA, an Indigenous-led organization protecting Papua's forests, securing community land rights, restoring watersheds, and strengthening cultural knowledge. Under Malcolm's leadership, Yapenda now supports conservation across more than 1 million hectares of rainforest and helped enable the rediscovery of Attenborough's longbeak echidna in the Cyclops Mountains, one of the most remarkable conservation breakthroughs in recent history. Malcolm, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you, Andrew and Stuart. It's also an honor to be here.
I'd like to get started by asking you about your name. Your full name clearly means a lot to you. Could you share the story behind your name and how it connects to your Yali Papuan identity and family history?
Yeah, so I was born amongst the Yali. My dad actually went there as a missionary. He's from Scotland, and his work. He started studying the Yali language, learning the Yali culture, and ultimately translated the Bible in the Yali language. But my name, so when my brother was, he was a premature breech birth in a little village, and my mom nearly died, and she had to nurse him back to health. And as Yali will do, if the mother's having a difficult time with the baby, the next child gets given to someone else to look after. So um, I was given to a Yali lady named Kumbuhe, and she looked after me and took me to the gardens with her and yeah, looked after me. And I think that's where my roots were developed in terms of my love for the Yali, for the language. I really grew up yeah, from my earliest memories around Yali's hearing Yali. It was my first language. So I was given a Yali name as well. So Malcolm Wilson is my Scottish name, and then Ilongo Kobak is my Yali name. So Ilongo literally means Il is I, and Ongo is like the price. So it's the pride of my eye. And Kobak is my Yali last name, and that was given to me because the Yali family who had kind of adopted me, that's their last name, Kobak. So hence I'm a Kobak.
Oh,
That's my name.
wow. That's incredible. I know I was told to ask about it and I did not disappoint. And you were born and raised among the Yali people in the Papuan Highlands and spent over 25 years, obviously, as a Canadian officer, as I said. But how did those
Yeah.
two very different worlds shape your worldview? And what ultimately pulled you back home to start Yapenda?
So yeah, growing up in the Highlands, especially when I grew up, it literally was another world. Papuans then were still living literally in the Stone Age. They were still using Stone Age implements. Um, you know, Papuans have been in the Highlands. Well, Papuans have been in Papua for 50 to 60,000 years, making them one of the, you know, longest single human occupations or inhabitants of a landscape on a single landscape for on this planet. So that culture is ancient, and by virtue of the isolation of the highlands, those cultures are very different. So I grew up in a very different world. Papuan Highlanders in where I grew up don't have kings or leaders in a Western sense, chiefs. In fact, there are no chiefs. It's very, you could say, egalitarian. Everything is decided by consensus. Everything is conversations and, everything is mutually agreed by everyone. Everyone decides together what they're going to do, which sometimes means it can take a while to agree on something. But the beauty is that it really is a consensus. So I kind of grew up in that environment, totally different worldview, totally different connection to nature. My earliest memories, everything from, being taken to taught how to hunt, knowing, the different patterns of species, birds feed on this tree at this time of year, couscous will be here at this time of year feeding on these fruits, cassowary will feed at the bottom of this tree at this time. Then while you're in the forest, learning how to, build a shelter in the forest, learning how to find clean water, what trees you can eat, the different uses, yeah, I could talk for hours about the different things we learned. And then I moved to Canada well, right before university. So I went to Scotland first. I did my Scottish, what are called hires or A levels, and then went to Canada for university. and very funny experiences. Like I played soccer in university, and we are traveling as a team, and we stop at a um, I can't think what they're called, but a service station, and I didn't know how to order anything, so I was like watching, and my friend says, "Like, you're not hungry?" And I'm like, "No, no, I'm good," because I just didn't know what to do. So he's like, "Well, let me get you a drink." I was like, "Okay." And then they hand me an empty cup, and I was like, well, "There's nothing in it." And he's like, "Well, you take it over there and get a drink." And I go to the thing. I'm like, but I was embarrassed. So I'm like watching what they're doing, and I see them, but I'm like putting it underneath, and nothing comes. And I'm like, oh. And my friend sees what I'm doing, and he's comes and he like pushes the bar for me so that the soda comes out. Professor in university said, I can remember giving us an assignments, and he was using Leave It to Beaver, and he goes, "I want you to provide an essay on how that resembles the modern, family." And I go up to him after class, and I'm like, I don't know what that is. And he thought I was just being like wise. He's like, "What do you mean you don't know what that is?" I'm like, I didn't, I never grew up with TV. Like, and so yeah, lots of like funny experiences, but also it made it very difficult. I always felt like a bit of an outsider. Um, and then as I got into law enforcement, especially my early years, I just stopped talking about where I came from and who I was, because I found it people didn't understand, and sometimes people could be mean and mock my experience. So I just sort of like bottled it all up inside. But for years, I just kept coming back and forth. Like Papua is my home. I love it here. And so over the course of a lifetime, I built like a network of connections. Met amazing people. Bruce Beeler, who's a renowned ornithologist in Papua, spent time with us. My father helped connect him with local Papuans to help him with his research. So yeah, I've met all kinds of amazing people over my life, and then that ultimately um, opened the doors to me meeting a lady named Anne Lambert, who founded what is now called Biome Conservation in Canada. And I was at a good stage in my career. I was doing really well. I was in national security investigations, interesting work. But you know, looking at Papua, and as I would come back and forth, seeing the change. So growing up, Papua really felt like another world. Protected. There's a great quote by E.O. Wilson where he talks about it as being like the last great wilderness, and long may it remain. Well, I realize it's not remaining. It's losing that battle, and I decided I have to do something. So I saw, just given my life experience, my cultural background, I thought, you know what better, um, who better to start an organization with Indigenous people, to try and start this battle to save Papua, than myself and the people I know, the networks I have, to be able to bridge those worlds, bring people together, and yeah, to do effective conservation work in Papua.
And when we're talking about, first of all, it's amazing. And by the way, if anyone wants to add a comment or ask a question, feel free to type it in the chat anytime, and I'll do my best to get to it. But yep, Penda is supporting communities to secure formal recognition of land rights and manage over 1 million hectares of forest. But for listeners who don't know Papua, can you walk us through how the land rights, culture, and forest protection are intertwined on the ground, and just how Papua is and what it's like to be there.
Yeah. Yeah, so again, like I hinted at, Papua is not, their cultures and customs are very different from Western. So Papuans traditionally they don't have certificates to say this is my land. It's just everybody knows, that's that family's land, that's that family's tree. That's it's everyone knows, and it's an oral history, so it's just shared down through the generations. But we live in a world where saying that's my land doesn't matter anymore. You need certificates, and you need government recognition, and so the first step is going into those communities and building relationships of trust, because they're starting to realize that there's people with malicious intentions, and they don't know who to trust sometimes. So is building relationships, helping them to understand we're there to help them, empower them, protect their land. And so the first stage is understanding whose land it is, and then working with various partners, stakeholders, government at various levels to get those land rights recognized. And there's various, it's very complicated. Indonesia has various land rights. Um, there are traditionally, it's called Tanah Adat in Indonesia, which literally means traditional land. So there is some room in governance to just recognize traditional lands. But, Papua has, just like its biodiversity in the natural history, is also in the human culture history. We have on the island of New Guinea is about 1,000 languages, um, so that which represents incredible cultural diversity, incredible traditions, and each have their own different worldview and their own different uh, cultural traditions. So it's quite complicated bringing all those people together. So one of the things we've done is we're building a partnership of various NGOs like us. Some are very grassroots, at community level. Some are church related. We also have the Legal Aid Society of Papua, and we're starting to form a coalition because we can't, there's it's a huge landscape. We can't do it all. So is finding partners that we can work with, that we can all learn from each other and build an effective model, um, to protect. As like Papua right now is on paper officially, I think 85% of primary forest is remaining intact in Tanah Papua, so the Indonesian half. But that's rapidly changing, so we're working against the clock to ensure that we can keep those numbers that high.
And it's awful that they're making land that clearly was belonging to the Papuans, and the Yali people. They have to have this paperwork and all this stuff just to say when it's clearly yours, and
Yeah,
uh, it's just awful. And I was reading how many trees you've been planting and contributing to this land. In your 2024 report, you highlight planting nearly 10,000 trees across sites, like in mangrove reforestation. You did around 3,000 mangroves. Can you share a story of one of those sites that captures the
yeah.
ecological impact and the human impact?
Yeah, so I just want to backtrack really quickly because something you brought up there, you're exactly right, is traditional Papuans, they live in a very different world and they don't understand the threats in many cases. And we had a meeting with some people in the Mambramo area. They're recently contacted people group, and they have almost no connection with the outside world. But there's loggers and palm oil moving into their area. And we were meeting with one of the elders, and he said to me, he says, Malcolm, there's so much forest we can just share. Like everybody can have some. And it was like heartbreaking for me, because that's of course his perception, and the pureness of his heart that he wants to share and share his forest with people, but he doesn't realize the threat. To go to your question, yeah, we have terrestrial and mangrove reforestation sites at various stages, and part of the vision of that is to take pressure off primary forests. So some of our forestry is not necessarily restoring the forest per se, but taking pressure off the primary forest. So planting things like fruit trees, nut trees, also trees for firewood, like fast growing trees. But I would say something that encapsulates like the power of reforestation projects and how they connect to community is, so this place is called Kayo Batu. It's in the Jayapura Bay, right near the main town. And their mangroves were actually destroyed in World War II, if you can imagine. And they evacuated their village during the war, and they came back to their village. And they heard about what we were doing, and we weren't doing mangrove reforestation at the time, but they approached us and said, "Could you please help us to reforest our mangroves?" So we met with the village, and we talked about what their needs are, and just a very typical Papua story. It's a small indigenous group. Only 6 people remain that fluently speak the language. They sense a loss of identity. Um, but what they wanted us to do is, in addition to plant mangroves, is help them develop a cultural center, and do things like celebrate their traditions like music, oral history. And interesting, through that we learned, so Kayo Batu is in their language, and I assumed it was an Indonesianized name. So kayu in Indonesian is wood and batu is stone. So I thought it was some connection to them being on this, this beach and trees. And while we're talking with the elders, I said, oh, I have to ask, just want to confirm that what the name means, and where did that come from? Because it sounds Indonesian. And he says, no, no, it's not kayu, it's kayo batu. I said, oh, what does that mean in your language? He says, fish nursery, but we don't have a fish nursery anymore. I was like, wow, that's how powerful. So, and it's a pretty cool project, and like everything, it's had its ups and downs, and it's still a bit of a struggle. We had commitment from local government to build a barrier because there's a lot of debris that gets washed out of the bay. Um, they committed to building the barrier. The Meteorological Society was giving us, analysis of waves and seasons when best to plant. We worked, yeah, the local community is planting trees, like it doesn't cost us anything, and then we just help them to develop a nursery to start developing the mangrove seedlings. Um, the project is faltering because we need to build that wall. It was never built, but it will happen, and for me the beauty of that story will be that when that mangrove comes back, that fish nursery will come back,
Mm.
and it'll sort of bring meaning back to that cultural identity of where that name comes from and who they are, and hopefully we can also um, you know preserve some of their cultural heritage through this as well.
Wow. It's unbelievable what you're doing, and that definitely will get done and finished, and we can't wait to see when it is. One of the big stories that brought Yapenda to global attention was the rediscovery of Attenborough's long-beaked echidna in the Cyclops Mountains. I looked on your Instagram and saw the camera trap. It blew me away. It's an incredible, incredible animal. Can you tell us about that expedition, what it took to build trust with the indigenous landowners there, and what that rediscovery means to Papuan communities as well as to science? Maybe a little bit about Edinburgh as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, so 2019, I think it was, I was on one of my visits to Papua. I actually brought my dad's remains back to Papua, and we buried him in our village in Halawan. But when I was out here at that time, um, a friend of mine asked me to connect with a guy named James Kempton from Oxford University who wanted to do an expedition in the Cyclops to search for the echidna. So while I was here, I went around the Cyclops visiting villages, just talking to people, saying, you know, finding out their stories, what they know about the echidna, and discovered that the village of Yongsu Sapari in particular, they have like really fascinating cultural traditions that relate to the echidna. They know it, and I met a couple of people who had even seen the echidna. So COVID happens, and then coming out of COVID is when I decided to start Yapenda. And my brother actually, he's became a citizen and he lives in Indonesia, lives in Papua. So he was helping me to start Yapenda, and he reached out to James and said, "Hey, we're starting an organization in Papua, and one of the things we want to support is research. Would you like to do this expedition?" And he jumped at it. And so we built up the expedition, but it was 2 years of planning with the indigenous community. There's been numerous attempts to find Attenborough's echidna, and all of them have failed. But I knew we were going to find it simply because I took the time to speak to the villagers, and I spoke to guys who said, "Yeah, I saw, in his particular case, he said I was hunting and I saw this animal down on the ground, and I'd heard about it, but I'd never seen one before. And I went to catch it, and it just buried almost instantly under the ground, and I never saw it again. And so I knew they were there, and I knew those people knew where to find them. So the expedition, again, partnered with local university. We spent time, identifying really promising young Papuan students who became a part of the expedition team. I believe there's like 9 Papuan students on the expedition team. And, you know, between the local people telling us where to look, um, and traditionally the highest parts of the Cyclops Peaks for them are traditionally sacred. So, for example, when we went up into those high mountains, before we went into the really high mountains where we knew they were, it was James tells the story better, but they, the elder said, "Hey, we need to stop and pray before we go into the sacred area for our
Mhm.
safety." And James was like, kind of skeptical. He's not a religious person, and he's like, "Okay, of course, I'm going to respect your traditions." And as soon as he finished the prayer, there was like a thunderclap, like
Wow.
out of the blue. He's like, "Oh wow." So, anyways, you know, the cool thing was like, we were working with local people, showing us where to go, who are also providing us like they would bring fish up from the ocean, like hike it up to the camps. So we'd have, fish, fresh fish. It was amazing. Like that hike up at like 5 in the morning. They the young people on the team were Papuans from all over Tanah Papua. Um, and we'd be sitting around the fire at night sharing, we'd be hearing stories from the guys from outside of Indonesia sharing their life experiences and listening to the stories of all these, young Papuans. And like James comment and Leo, the other one of the other people in the expedition commented to me, these guys will make the best botanists and field botanists in the world because they're just so natural in this landscape. They have the traditional knowledge, the amount of times, they'd be, oh, look at that. And the white guys are like, what, where, what? I can't see it. They just see everything in the forest. It's just second nature to them. So yeah, so that's for me, the spill out from that. And I think, yeah, we can talk about it more later, but the development of these young Papuans, that's going to come out of this and this discovery. And
Right.
then, yeah, so the one thing I want to say about this is James and I are sitting there, but we're going through, the data cards at the end of the expedition. And we still didn't have the echidna. And I just swear to absolute truth. We're literally on the last data card from the last camera. And the others said we were all doing it together, and everyone was like going off to bed. It was like I don't know what time it was, like 11 o'clock at night or something.
Mhm.
And James and I are going through the last card, and then we see the video of the echidna, and we're like shouting and jumping up and down, and the guys are coming running out of the rooms. We have a like a house base for this kind of work, so there's all the researchers and the team are all in different rooms. And they're, what's going on? What's going on? And we're like, we got the echidna. We got the echidna. So yeah, it was pretty cool.
And that's the camera trick. This is a screen grab from that video you saw, right? On the top right. That's the same one.
That's no, that is actually a long-beaked echidna,
Okay.
or from the Highlands.
Okay, okay.
So yeah, but the the black and white one, which you'll see on on our website, is that original footage of the Attenborough's long-beaked echidna.
So if you want to
Um,
go there, check out the website. What's the website? So people could check it out.
It's yep, Yapenda_Papua.
Okay, great. And I'll send that.
as as you know, at Saving Species, we have corridor projects. We now have a dozen corridor projects around the world in South America and Africa and Asia. And all of our partners have have camera traps out there. And yeah, there's an awful lot of camera videos that you watch, propping your eyelids up so you can not fall asleep as you go through the hundredth, branch moving across the camera triggering it by mistake. But once in a while, you get these moments sort of incredible excitement of animals going across,
Yeah,
tigers with their cubs. We got a pair of jaguars who were making baby jaguars the other week in Panama. And when we get particularly of these rare animals, it's just so exhilarating. It really tells you why we're doing what we're doing
yeah,
in protecting these areas and in our case, restoring them.
yeah.
And what was it like when you heard that Edinburgh was reaching out to you and when you saw it? How'd that come about?
So I had heard. I'm a huge fan of Attenborough, and I've loved him my whole life. And um, when I did go to the West, I started watching, the nature documentaries, and that's where I discovered him. And but I wanted to personally connect with him, and I asked around, and I discovered that he doesn't do emails, but he likes letters. So I literally just wrote him a letter saying, I thought you'd want to know that we've rediscovered your, echidna that's named after you. And we went back and forth on some conversation, and he found out more about who we are and what we're doing, and he offered to write a letter to write a testimonial for us. And so that's actually his. He wrote that, hand wrote his date on there, and his
Wow.
signed it. So that was a. I actually cried when I got that letter.
That is, I mean, I can't imagine what it would have been like I mean, at least growing up for me, that's one of the biggest people there is and for him to recognize it just shows what you're doing.
I mean, Attenborough has a long history in New Guinea,
Yeah,
and he started out as I mean, I remember this sort of growing up in Britain. He started out with I think it was called something like Zoo Quest or something like that, but it was a black and white TV program where he went to all these exciting places. And I recall that one of the films that they did was the first contact with an indigenous group that had not been contacted before. And so that's sort of remarkable footage. I mean, first contacts are rare and they're often dangerous to one or both parties. But to have this footage of them meeting this group for the first time. But one of the memorable things about this footage is how this particular group counts, because if I can do it on the screen, it was they counted to 10, but it was one, two, three, four, five, and then they sort of tapped the wrist for six, and then the middle of the elbow for seven, and the elbow for eight, and here for nine, and up there for 10. And it was obviously what they were doing. I mean, you couldn't understand the
yeah,
language, but what an experience to
yeah.
engage an indigenous group for the first time.
So it's funny you say share that story because in Yali, that's how they count, and
Oh, really?
uh,
Fantastic.
yeah, and what the in Yali. So like this number is Nangalop in Yali, and then Nisango. So they're literally neck, ear, Nungul, which is head, and then when it goes the other side, it becomes Foma, which literally means the ear on the other side, the neck on the other side, the shoulder on the other side. So that's the numbers. It's pretty cool.
That's incredible. I was thinking we did mention education, but before we get to that, I was thinking maybe we could talk about the technology used to find wildlife like the echidna.
Yeah,
You're now combining indigenous knowledge with new tools like AI-assisted wildlife monitoring and upcoming lost species expeditions. How do you balance cutting edge with traditional knowledge systems so that the Papuans' values stay at the center of the work?
yeah, yeah. So yeah, there's multiple layers to this, but I would say first and foremost is you know, I spoke to Dr. Sam Turvey of Zoological Society of London years ago about this very issue, and he told me a story of where he'd been searching for a specific species of dolphin in China, and it hit him while he's on the water. He's looking around, going like, all these local people fishing, and he's like, well, if anyone knows where they are, they know where they are. Why aren't I talking to them?
Hmm.
That should be the first question. And so that's exactly it. And it's not just about they have knowledge, they know where they are, they know, they also know things like, um, well, you learn their traditions. So, for example, learning that the highest peaks are sacred to them. So there's no hunting allowed there. So if there's anywhere they're going to be, it's going to be where there's no hunting allowed. But also just out of a simple respect, like this is their landscape and we're coming into their landscape. Of course, we should talk to them first and engage them and find out what their needs and desires are. Also, they live in a they're everything is interconnected with the spiritual cosmos and the real world. So, for example, technology, Papuan people feel like, well, that's intruding and the spiritual realm might be upset and that could cause repercussions, which would be manifested in like, earthquakes or landslides. So you need to explain to them what you're doing and it, the respectfulness of it and get their permission. Because if you say, for example, if you went in and you put out a grid of cameras and there was an earthquake, they might perceive that as, oh, that you've upset the spirits. So you have to engage them to make it to make it effective long term. Um, and I just wanted to allude to something that Stuart mentioned, about it is huge amount of work hours going through this footage, and that is where things like technology come in. So we're developing technology with a couple partners to develop because there's no database for uh, species recognition in Papua. So we're developing a database with AI, and we've done some trials now on 6 species, and it was about 98% effective on correctly recognizing species, which reduces. We literally spent multiple volunteers, probably hundreds, if not thousands of hours going through cameras. So that'll accelerate the amount of work we can do and make it more effective. Um, and yeah, just the connection, it'll also tie into the education piece, but in this picture, as you see here, is Jeff Wanda. He's also known as Gisan Morib. And then the young lady there is Yolanda Duiri, two Papuans who were on the expedition. Jeff, we got MBZ funding for them to do continued research in the Cyclops. Now we're studying the distribution of the Echidna and trying to assess population, which will help us to develop a conservation strategy. And also Jeff was successful he became an Edge Fellow last year from Zoological Society of London as well. And so he's doing an Edge Fellowship. And we're in talks with Kew and Singapore Botanical Gardens about similarly doing something with Yolanda to develop her potential. And so we're excited they're just two examples, but these are Indigenous Papuans who will be the future conservation leaders and hopefully take me out of a job, and they'll be the ones leading things in the future.
In the heart of what you're saying, I think is development and developing people that can, be the next generation to help this land. I wanted to talk about a photo. I actually don't know the context. You said that you would tell us all for the first time now. So here's a story, and I know it has to do with education, and I'm excited
Yeah.
the backstory.
So, we've been looking at how can we reach more people. One of the huge problems here is waste, plastic waste in particular. Um, as a team, we said, first of all, we need, it's hard to change the minds of adults and change behavior, but young people is the key. So we already had a fairly ad hoc program. We'd go through churches, community groups, doing presentations, but we decided to approach this particular school. It's one of the well, it's a local school, but it's a really good school. Yeah, they're just a great school. We reached out to them and said, could we do a presentation at your school? They said, absolutely. When we talked about it with the principal, she loved it so much. She said, I'm actually the chair of a committee. We represent all 52 schools in the Sentani Jayapura area. I would like you guys to do this at every school. So now that's basically one school a week we'll be able to reach, and that'll eventually reach, hundreds and thousands of kids. So this presentation, it's basically a little introduction to who we are. Jeff and Yolanda talking about the research they're doing, getting them excited about, the species, the endemic species, talking about Attenborough's echidna and the international excitement that came around that, and just what the unique evolutionary history of New Guinea and how we have these, amazing animals, monotremes. And so, we talked about that. And then at the end, we talked about plastic waste and, the lifespan of different wastes and how long they last in the environment, and, what we can do as individuals to change things. And, as you can see, all the kids got water bottles. But at the very end, Jeff asked me, did I have a question I want to ask the kids? And I said to the class, I said, hey, what do you think you can do as individuals to make a difference? And, good answers. Like, kids said, well, we can use the water bottles you gave us, so we don't need to buy plastic water bottles. I'm like, yeah, that's great. don't throw waste in the environment because it's, it can harm the animals and doesn't disappear. And and then the last little girl, she's kind of like, trying to. So I said, "Yeah, I saw you. What's your thing?" And she says, "We all need to teach our parents and our friends and all of our family."
Mm.
And to me, that was like, yes, that's 100% it. So we can reach, 52 schools and a few thousand kids, but they can reach a few thousand people, amongst them again. So it replicates. And yeah, it just made me excited and hopeful for the future. And it was just like a really inspiring moment for me.
Wow. Yeah, and uh, to go back to education, what does it look like when you're teaching these kids? What does education for conservation look like to Papua?
So our own school, which is in the Highlands, um, two things. First is understanding Papuans come from an oral society, so writing, reading is not is not traditional or natural to them. So we even see it like in our staff, people who are, we've got a member of our team, has a master's in agroforestry, has worked for years, he's worked with as a conservation or community development with British Petroleum and their natural gas project. He's worked all over the place. But we noticed like if we send like a message out in a group chat and say, hey, we're gonna have a meeting at 10 a.m. on Saturday at this place, he'll be like, sorry, when's the meeting again? Well, yeah, but if you tell him like I could tell him, hey, we're gonna meet December 28th at 3 a.m. He'll remember that. Like, because it's just amazing. It's wired into them. So in our school, we recognize that. So early on, two things is understanding that they learn differently. So you have to be patient and try and teach in a very visual way for them. The other is, there's a loss of culture and identity that's happening in this island, and that cultural identity is very important for the future of Papua. Um, and so in our curriculum, we incorporate, my mom developed a literacy program years ago in the Yali language. So we're re-implementing that into our school. So the kids will all learn to read and write in their own language first before they start learning in the national language. But also, it's not just traditional education, it's getting kids connected to nature, loving nature. So, we do things like we'll do reforestation, and the kids will come out every Friday afternoon. The kids will do something with us practical. So, whether it's going to the nursery and watering plants, learning how to make organic fertilizer, picking up waste in the village, or going to the planting site to plant trees, it's getting them involved and getting them and then talking about why we're doing what we're doing and you know, as you're walking, through a deforested area, you're asking the kids, "Hey, what do you notice? Oh, it's really hot. And there's no, and the ground is like bare." And then as you start to get into the forest, what do you notice now? Oh, it's cooler, and oh, and there's lots of plants on the ground now, and oh, there's more birds now, and so the understanding the connection of these things and why you do it. You can tell a kid, don't throw plastic away, but why? Like, what does it do to be able to go in the environment and show them? You see how that, that plastic is blocking that, whatever, that waterway there, in very real ways, showing them. And so that's the start is getting kids connected to nature, connected to their culture, and getting them passionate about nature and conservation. And then, but there's another level, and that's, the story of like Jeff and Yolanda. There's others, Heron, Seeley, and finding opportunities to develop them to their potential. So, Yolanda's interest is botany. He's interested in mammal species, is finding opportunities to develop them so that they can reach their potential. Um, yeah, so and what we just talked about. Like, so yeah, education is the key, and for me, that is fundamental to the future of protecting Papua.
It's amazing what you do, and you're almost ahead of a lot of the US education systems because you have so many different ways for them to experience it, whether it's sensory or facts, or you're engaging so many different parts of the brain. And it's so cool that
Yeah.
they're able to go out and experience the nature, and that probably stays with them a lot more. And a big part of your work is about livelihoods, women's empowerment, and community resilience. So I was wondering what you have learned about what Papuans communities actually want and need for conservation, and how that has that changed the way Yapenda designs its programs?
Um, sorry, I got something happened in the background. Can you, sorry, just repeat that
Yeah,
question?
no worries. So, what have you learned about Papuan communities about what they actually want and need from conservation? And how has that changed the way Yapenda designs its programs?
Okay. Yeah, so again, nothing is like black and white. Papuan culture has many beautiful aspects. There's a traditional negative aspect, and that's women are not, they're marginalized traditionally. Their misogyny is, women weren't included in conversations traditionally. Women weren't respected traditionally. So that's something we, in a culturally sensitive way, is recognizing that and providing more opportunity for women. And we see a drain of men, young men especially, from villages. And so the ones left to look after the traditional values in the community are women. So providing those women with more opportunities to support them, so that we do things which aren't traditional healthcare, like help provide healthcare. We provide training to women who run small businesses. We've started a vetiver grass planting program. Vetiver stops erosion. It's an incredible plant. If you look at it, it's non-invasive. It dies after the trees grow. It doesn't like shade, but it can be used to produce crafts. It can be used. It can be oil can be extracted from it. Can be fed to livestock. So we've started a vetiver planting program that's primarily women. It's for women. One of the neat things is one of the villages where we were planting it, we had a man and a woman, and then some support team working with them. And I pretty quickly realized like this woman was like on the ball, like she was a natural leader. Really, everything you asked her, like she or told her to do, she would understand. Never wouldn't have to ask a question again. It would be done. It would be done right. And I said to her one day, I said, Ania, I said, you clearly are the leader here. So I think, we want to promote you and make you a manager. I want you to run things here. And she goes, that's fine. You're right. I am running things. She goes, but the men won't like that if you call me a manager. So just don't tell them I'm the manager, but I'll be the manager. So,
Given,
um,
I hate to interrupt this, but we're now down to our last 15 minutes, and we have a great question from Eric, and we do encourage
yeah,
everybody
yeah.
to type in their questions. So Eric would like to know more about echidnas. I've not seen this echidna, but I've seen echidnas in Australia, and I mean, any mammal that looks like that is special. Any mammal that lays eggs is even more special. So can you tell us a little bit more about the echidnas, please?
Yeah, so I'm not a biologist, but I'll do my best. It is, it's a monotreme. It's an egg-laying mammal. It's the oldest mammal on the planet in evolutionary terms. It's, it like so much in Papua evolved quite uniquely. We're east of Wallacea, so it's a very different. We don't have monkeys. We don't have hooved animals. Don't have tigers. So, it inhabits that landscape. It's another cool thing about it. It has a cloacia, I think it's pronounced. So basically one hole for breeding, defecation. It's quite remarkable. Um, yeah, it eats worms and insects in the forest. It can bury, hence the back legs being, reversed so it can push itself through the ground. Um, yeah, again, lots of unusual animals in our landscape, birds of paradise, bowerbirds, build these remarkable dance display sites, which was one of the joys of my childhood, getting to go and watch these birds do these displays. Um, yeah, I hope that's kind of answers some of that question.
Yeah, we've got another great question too. It does, thank you. About the deforestation. I mean, my experience in Papua is very limited, but I think everybody has to be aware of just the how quickly deforestation is expanding in the area.
Sorry, as I mentioned earlier, I keep having planes flying overhead and I didn't get all that question.
Oh, a concern about increasing deforestation in the area, and particularly with the liquid natural gas pipeline and that kind of development that sort of threatens the forests and the people that live in them.
Yeah, so there's layers of threats. I would say the biggest single threat would be palm oil. It requires large
Yeah,
landscapes. There's a huge demand for palm oil. And as I recently met with a business leader in Jakarta, and he rightly said, conservationists get upset about palm oil, but who's consuming palm oil? It's the West. So if
yeah.
you're serious about it, stop consuming it. Um, the other, we have the largest deforestation site in the world ongoing right now in southern Papua. Um, and it's also driven by, it's a biofuel project, my understanding. And it's, again, a lack of respect for indigenous people and traditionally owned lands, but also it's just a nonsensical project. It doesn't really make any sense in terms of, yeah, I have to be careful what I say sometimes, but yeah, it's not it's not wise. And then the roads that are being made throughout Papua now, which are opening up Papua to the outside world, while they have benefits, they allow access for healthcare workers and such, and transportation of goods, but they also provide access for nefarious people, like illegal mining, illegal logging. So those are what are the main drivers of deforestation in Papua now.
I mean, the experiences that we have at Saving Nature of looking at not Papua, because we don't have any projects there, but areas not that far away in Sumatra and further away in Africa and South America, is often indigenous communities are very vulnerable because people tell them that things are going to be better if
Yeah,
there's palm oil, if there's development, if there's roads, and all too often it couldn't be further from the case, and the local people get really harmed by these actions.
yeah.
There was a, oops.
So I was just gonna say, and that's one of the good things about education is it's not just education through youth and schools, is we also are doing education through community groups and churches and educating the existing adult leaders about, the realities of the world that we live in and the threats they pose. Like the elder who said to me, "Oh, there's enough trees for everyone,"
Yeah,
and helping them to understand that the threat is more than they realize. And for example, if a gold miner comes in and offers you, $10,000 to a Papuan, that seems like a huge sum of money, but they don't realize the long-term consequences don't even come close to $10,000.
yeah.
There was a question from Joshua Taylor saying you mentioned agroforestry. Could you describe any of the traditional ways of going about food production? I'm interested if there are traditional practices which you'd like to see more often.
Yeah, so traditional, so Highland and Lowland are very different. Highlanders traditionally use slash and burn. They relied heavily on various crops, taro, cassava, sweet potato, bananas, and they all require, land to plant. But they would, with a small population, it's sustainable. They just rotate between sites, and the forest grows back in the meantime. But as population grows and as people are displaced, more land is needed, and transmigrants come in. It requires more and more land for gardening in the highlands. So that's a big driver of deforestation in the highlands. Um, in terms of traditional systems, I would say it's more in the highlands. It's more related to recognizing um, traditionally sacred forests and continuing to protect those forests and ensure that because the cultural traditions are what protect those forests, but if they lose their cultural traditions, those forests will no longer be protected. Um, in other parts of Papua, like where I am here right now on the coast of Papua, they are able to live primarily off of the ocean or the lake, so fishing. So they don't need as much, so they traditionally will, they have a lot of fruit trees which just grow within the forest. They can harvest those. They do very small gardens, so they have a very limited impact on the forest traditionally. So I would say in areas like this, it's all about, yeah, supporting them to maintain that lifestyle because it is sustainable. And they have really neat, so something I learned a couple of years ago in the village of Yongsu, we were talking about they've noticed loss of certain species of fish or less of them anyways. And he said I said, well, how do you manage that as people? He says, well, we used to all the villages, and there's numerous language groups and tribal groups around these mountains, the Cyclops Mountains. He said we used to all, as a consensus, we would notice, oh, there's less yellowfin tuna. So we would basically all agree we're not going to fish them for 2 years. And so they would naturally come back. But he says the problem is now we have all these transmigrants. They don't respect our culture and traditions, and so they don't. We can all agree in it as a consensus, but they don't. So trying to create more collaboration between social groups, whether it's churches or community groups, to bring up these conversations and try and get consensus from transmigrants who are moving into these areas to participate in these traditional management systems.
And real quick, Sonia wants to know how are you funded, and then I have another question for you if we have time.
So our biggest donor is Biome in Canada, which used to be called International Conservation Fund of Canada. And then Rewild would be our second biggest partner. Rewild supports us both in American-based conservation organization, both in terms of capacity building, also grants for specific projects, and networking for us, helping us, recognizing there's, whether, for example, research, they partially funded the Cyclops expedition. So that's how Rewild helps. And then specific grants, like we have MBZ funding, we have some funds from Edge for the research we're doing. And then we also have grants from local government. So we're building new school buildings that's paid for by the local government. They provided a grant. We've received material from donors, whether it's equipment for the school. And then we also have grants from the New Zealand government funding. So they subsidize our healthcare and education. And the Vetiver project, that's entirely funded by the New Zealand government.
Just
Wow.
delighted to hear that you're getting funded from the what used to be called the International Conservation Wildlife Fund of Canada. I'm sure I
Yeah.
missed it. Because when they started, we spent a lot of time talking about what they wanted to do and what we wanted to do, and we very much kept in touch with them. Just wonderful people, and it's good to have. I mean, we at Saving Nature feel very lucky that there are a lot of there's a lot of great people out there doing the kinds of things that we're doing. Sometimes, we do joint projects, and it's absolutely fantastic that there are all these great
Yeah.
people.
I
Um,
should add Biome, anything that's donated to Biome through their website.
mhm.
You can specifically donate to us through Biome. They don't take their overheads are all covered independently. So any donations 100% go to the project, whether it's us or anyone else in the world. And
Fantastic.
yes,
We probably have
I
time
was
for
just gonna
one more
say,
question.
okay, go for it.
Is there another question out there, Andy, that we
Yeah,
want
so
to?
I just wanted to know real quick. Let's see. Moving along. Oh, yes. So, Malcolm, I wanted to close on your vision for Papua, 10, 20 years from now. What does it look like?
Um, Yeah, so it's right in our statement, a thriving Papua. So for Indigenous people with the forest protected. So like I mentioned earlier, about 85% of the primary forest remains. My dream would be to see that stays that way. But what hasn't happened so far is including Indigenous people in that conversation, they should be the ones designing this, implementing the conservation strategy. So, my dream is to see, some of these people we're supporting becoming those future leaders. The bottom right picture there, that little girl in the middle, she's from that village where our school is, and I'm hoping she's got a scholarship next year to go to one of the most prestigious universities in Indonesia to become a teacher. So people like that, that's what my hope is that these people become the future leaders and they have an Attenborough-like impact in Papuan culture. And whether if it's one, two, three, four hopefully more. But if we can rise up a few people like that out of our work, then I have hope, and I really believe that that vision of protected forests and a thriving indigenous Papua can happen.
Fantastic. Malcolm, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for taking your time. This is really inspirational. It's an area that I have visited only briefly once. It was an incredible experience, and hearing what you're doing here has been a real treat. Thank you so much for joining us, and you
Yeah.
have a great whatever time of day it is wherever you are. Um, and, um, and thank you everybody for joining us for the Americans. I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving and wherever else you are in the world. So please take care of everybody. And again, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very
People are
much.
saying absolutely brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Malcolm. Thank you. You're wonderful. Lots of nice love. And Lisa wants to get in touch with you, Malcolm. So I'll send you that. But thank you, everyone, for joining. This will all be recorded and posted and shared with you all. And looking forward to the next one. And thank you so much.
Take care,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye
Thank you.
bye.
Bye.